Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Jim, JB, and Marlene. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, full books, and fictional readings found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's relax with a charming listener recommendation that takes us on a tour of the English countryside. We're reading Over Fen and Wold by James John Hissey, author of A Drive Through England, On the Box Seat, Through 10 English Counties, On Southern English Roads, etc., with 14 full-page and some smaller illustrations by the author, and a map of the route. First published in 1898 by Macmillan and Company Limited, London and New York. Let's begin. Dedicated to the most cherished memory of my 1-year-old son, William Averill Hissey. Preface. The following pages contain the chronicle of a leisurely and most enjoyable driving tour through a portion of eastern England little esteemed and almost wholly, if not quite, neglected by the average tourist. For Lincolnshire is generally deemed to be a flat land, mostly consisting of fens, and with but small or no scenic attractions. We, however, found Lincolnshire to be a country of hills as well as of fens, and we were charmed with the scenery thereof, which is none the less beautiful because neither famed nor fashionable. Some day it may become both. Lincolnshire scenery awaits discovery. Hitherto the pleasure traveler has not found it out, but that is his loss. We set forth on our tour like the renowned Dr. Syntax in search of the picturesque, combined with holiday relaxation, and in neither respect did we suffer disappointment. Our tour was an unqualified success. A more delightfully independent, a more restful, or a more remunerative way of seeing the country than by driving through it without haste or any precisely arranged plan, it is difficult to conceive, ensuring, as such an expedition does, perfect freedom and a happy escape from the many minor worries of ordinary travel. The only thing absolutely needful for the driving tourist to do being to find an inn for the night. Writing of the joys of road travel in the pre-railway days, George Eliot says, You have not the best of it in all things, O youngsters. The elderly man has his enviable memories, and not the least of them is the memory of a long journey on the outside of a stagecoach. The railway is most excellent for speed, but the slow, old-fashioned way of getting from one end of the country to the other is the better thing to have in the memory. The happy outside coach passenger, seated on the box from the dawn to the gloaming, gathered enough stories of English life, enough aspects of earth and sky to make episodes for a modern Odyssey. And so did we, seated in our own dog-cart, more to be envied even than the summertime coach passenger, for we had full command over our conveyance, so that we could stop on the way, loiter, or make haste as the mood inclined. Sir Edwin Arnold says, "This world we live in is becoming sadly monotonous, as it shrinks year by year to smaller and smaller apparent dimensions under the rapid movement provided by limited passenger trains and swift ocean steamships. Well, by driving, one enlarges the apparent size of the world, for as John Burrow puts it, when you get into a railway carriage, you want a continent, but the man in his carriage requires only a county." Very true. Moreover, the man who steams round the world may seem less than the man who merely drives round about an English county. The former is simply conveyed, the latter travels, a distinction with a vast difference. In conclusion, I have only to express the hope that the illustrations herewith engraved on wood from my sketches by Mr. George Pearson, to whom I tender my thanks for the pains he has taken in their reproduction, may lend an added interest to this unvarnished record of a most delightful and health-giving holiday. J. J. Hissey, 1898. Over Fen and Wold, Chapter 1. Our tour was planned one chilly winter's evening. Just a chance letter originated the idea of exploring a portion of Lincolnshire during the coming summer. Our project in embryo was to drive from London to that more or less untraveled land of Fen and Wold by the Old North Road, and to return to our starting point by another route, to be decided upon when we had finished our Lincolnshire wanderings. It was in this wise. The day had been wild and blustery, as drear a day indeed as an English December well could make. A bullying nor'easter had been blowing savagely ever since the morning. By the evening it had increased to a veritable storm. The hail and sleet were hurled against the windows of our room, and the wind, as it came in fierce gusts, shook the casements as though it would blow them in if it could. My wife and self were chatting about former wanderings on wheels, trying fairly successfully to forget all about the inclement weather without, each comfortably ensconced in a real easy chair within the ample inglenook of that cozy chamber known to the household as the snuggery, a happy combination of studio and library. The thick curtains were closely drawn across the mullioned windows to exclude any possible draughts. The great wood fire on the hearth, not one of your black coal fires in an iron grate arrangement, blazed forth right merrily. The oak logs crackled in a companionable way, throwing at the same time a ruddy glow into the room, and the bright flames roared up the wide chimney ever and again with an additional potency in response to extra vehement blasts without. "What a capital time," I exclaimed, "to look over some of the sketches we made during our last summer holiday. They will help us to recall the long, sunny days, those jolly days we spent in the country, and bring back to mind many a pleasant spot and picturesque old home." No sooner was the idea expressed than I sought out sundry well-filled sketchbooks from the old oak corner cupboard devoted to our artistic belongings. True magicians were those sketchbooks, with a power superior even to that of Prince Hussein's carpet of Arabian Nights renown, for by their aid not only were we quickly transported to the distant shires, but we also turned back the hand of time to the genial summer days, and in spirit were soon far away repeating our past rambles, afoot and a wheel, along the bracken-clad hillsides, over the smooth-turfed downs, and across the rugged, boulder-strewn moors, here purple with heather, and there aglow with golden gorse. Anon we were strolling alongside the grassy banks of a certain quiet gliding river, beloved of anglers, and spanned, just at a point where an artist would have placed it, by a hoary bridge built by craftsmen dead and gone to dust long centuries before. Then, bringing forcibly to mind the old beloved coaching days, came a weather-stained hostelry with its great signboard still swinging as of yore on the top of a high post, and bearing the representation, rude but effective, of a ferocious-looking red lion that one well-remembered summer evening bade us two tired and dust-stained travelers a hearty heraldic welcome. Next we found ourselves wandering down a narrow valley, made musical by a little stream, tumbling and gambolling over its rocky bed, for the sketches reveal to the mind infinitely more than what the eye merely saw, recalling nature's sweet melodies, her songs without words, as well as her visible beauties, besides raising within one countless half-forgotten memories. A stream that turned the great green droning wheel of an ancient watermill, down to which on either hand gently sloped the wooded hills, and amidst the foliage, half drowned in greenery, we could discern at irregular intervals the red-tiled roof trees of lowly cottage homes, peeping picturesquely forth. Then we were transported to an old, time-grayed manor house of many gables, and great stacks of clustering chimneys, its ivy-grown walls and lichen-laden roof being backed by rook-haunted ancestral elms. The ancient home, with its quaint old-fashioned garden and reed-grown moat encircling it, seemed, when we first came unexpectedly thereon, more like the fond creation of a painter or a poet than a happy reality. "Don't you remember," said my wife, as we were looking at this last drawing, "what a delightful day we spent there, and how the owner, when he discovered us sketching, at once made friends with us and showed us all over the dear old place, and how he delighted in the old armor in the hall, and how he told us that his ancestors fought both at Cressy and Agincourt. How nice it must be to have valiant ancestors like that. And don't you remember that low-ceilinged, oak-paneled bedchamber with the leaden lattice window, the haunted room, and how it looked its part? And afterwards how the landlady of the village inn where we baited our horses would have it that the ghost of a former squire who was murdered by someone, or the ghost of somebody who was murdered by that squire, she was not quite sure which, stalks about that very chamber every night. And then there were the curiously clipped yews on the terrace, and the old carved sundial at the end of the long walk, and— But the last sentence was destined never to be finished, for at that moment a knock came at the door, followed by a servant bringing in a letter all moist and dripping, a trifling incident that, however, sufficed to transport us back again from our dreamy wanderings among sunny summer scenes to that drear December night. Our fireside travels came to an abrupt end. "What a night for anyone to be out," I muttered, as I took the proffered letter, glancing first at the handwriting, which was unfamiliar, then at the postmark, which bore the name of a remote Lincolnshire town. Yet we knew no one in that whole wide country. Who could the sender be, we queried. He proved to be an unknown friend, who in a good-natured mood had written to suggest, in case we should be at a loss for a fresh country to explore during the coming summer, that we should try Lincolnshire. He further went on to remark, lest we should labor under the popular and mistaken impression, which we did, that it was a land more or less given over to flats, fens, and fogs, that he had visitors from London staying with him with their bicycles, who complained loudly of the hills in his neighborhood. Furthermore, just to whet our appetites, as he put it, there followed a tempting list by way of sample of some of the good things scenic, antiquarian, and archaeological that awaited us should we only come. Amongst the number, to enumerate only a few in chance order, and leaving out Lincoln and its cathedral, there were Crowland's ruined abbey, set away in the heart of the fens, numerous old churches that by virtue of their remoteness had the rare good fortune to have escaped the restorer's hands, and not a few of these, we were given to understand, contained curious brasses and interesting tombs of knightly warriors and unremembered worthies. Tattershall Castle, a glorious old pile, one of the finest structures of the kind in the kingdom, the historic town of Boston, with its famous fane and stump, and Dutch-like waterways, Stamford, erst the rival of Oxford and Cambridge, with its Jacobean buildings, crumbling colleges, and quaint calices or hospitals, Grantham, with its wonderful church spire and genuine medieval hostelry, dating back to the 15th century, that still offers entertainment to the latter-day pilgrim, and moreover makes him comfortable exceedingly, besides many an old coaching inn wherein to take our ease, not to mention the picturesque villages and sleepy market towns, all innocent of the hand of the modern builder, nor the rambling manor houses with their unwritten histories, the many moated granges with their unrecorded traditions, and perhaps not least, 2 really haunted houses possessing well-established ghosts Then there was Tennyson's birthplace at pretty Summersby, and the haunts of his early life round about, the wild wolds he loved so and sang of, the highlands of Lincolnshire, a dreamy land full of the unconscious poetry of civilization, primitive and picturesque, yet not wholly unprogressive, a land where the fussy railway does not intrude, and where the rush and stress of this bustling century has made no visible impression. A land also where odd characters abound, and where the wise sayings of their forefathers, old folklore, legends, and strange superstitions linger yet. And last on the long list, and perhaps not least in interest, there was the wide fenland, full of its own weird but little understood beauties. Verily, here was a tempting program. Pondering over all these good things, we found ourselves wondering how it was that we had never thought of Lincolnshire as fresh ground to explore before. Did we not then call to mind what a most enjoyable tour we had made through the little esteemed eastern counties, though before starting on that expedition we had been warned by friends, who had never been there by the way, that we should repent our resolve, as that portion of England was flat, tame, and intensely uninteresting, having nothing to show worth seeing, fit for farming, and little else. Yet we remembered that we discovered the Langton Hills on our very first day out, and still retained a vivid impression of the glorious views therefrom, and all the rest of the journey was replete with pleasant surprises and scenic revelations. Truly, we found the land of the Broads to be flat, but so full of character and special beauty as to attract artists to paint it. Therefore we exclaimed, why should not Lincolnshire prove equally interesting and beautiful? Perhaps even, like the once tourist-neglected Broads, the charms and picturesqueness of Lincolnshire may someday be discovered, be guidebook lauded as a delightful holiday ground. Who knows? Besides, there was the drive thither and back along the old coach roads to be remembered. That of itself was sure to be rewarding. The letter set us a-thinking, and the special shelf in our little library, where sundry road books and county maps are kept, was searched for a chart of Lincolnshire. We were soon deeply engrossed with books and maps, and with their aid planned a very promising tour. By the time the old brass Cromwell clock on the bracket in a corner of the inglenook struck 12, we had finally decided for good or ill to try Lincolnshire. Already we found ourselves longing for the summer time to come, that we might be off. But for all our longings and schemings, it was the 1st of September before we actually set out on our journey. However, if this were unkindly delayed by the fates, to make amends for such delay, it must be confessed that they granted us perfect travelers' weather, for during almost the whole time we were away from home, there was not a day either too hot or too cold for open-air enjoyment. We had very little rain and plenty of sunshine. According to my experience, the month of September and the first week in October are generally the finest times in the year in England. During our journey we picked up to us many fresh bits of weather lore and old folk sayings. These were always welcome, and one of them runs thus: "It's a foul year when there are not 20 fine days in September. In that month truly the days are growing gradually shorter, but on the other hand, the dust, that one fly in the ointment of the driving tourist, is not so troublesome. Indeed, on this occasion it did not trouble us at all, nor is the heat so oppressive, nor the light so glaring as in July or August. And if the evenings draw in then, well, it only means an early start to have still a good long day before one, and the dusk coming on as you reach your night's destination is a plausible excuse for indulging in a home-like fire in your apartment. And what a look of friendly familiarity a fire imparts to even a strange room, to say nothing of the mellow glow of candles on the table where your meal is spread. There is something indescribably cheery and suggestive of comfort, coziness, and taking your ease about a fire-warmed and candle-lighted room. Truly there are certain compensating advantages in the early evenings. Did not Charles Lamb, writing to a brother poet, Bernard Barton, exclaim of July, "Deadly long are the days, these summer all-day days, with but a half-hour's candlelight and no firelight at all"? Now, kind reader, please picture in your mind's eye our comfortable and roomy dog-cart, carefully packed with all our necessary baggage, rugs and waterproofs, the latter in case of cold or wet, our sketching and photographic paraphernalia, and even every luxury that long experience, gleaned from many former expeditions of a like nature, could suggest, not forgetting a plentiful supply of good tobacco of our favorite mixture, nor yet books to beguile a possible dull hour, which, however, never occurred. Amongst the books was a copy of Kingsley's Hereward the Wake, as this treats of the Fenland heroes, as well as describes much of the lowland scenery of Lincolnshire. When I add that we included in our kit a supply of candles in case the light at some of the country inns should be too poor to read or write by comfortably, I think it may be taken for granted that nothing was forgotten that would in any way add to our ease or pleasure. It is astonishing how materially the thought of such apparent trifles adds to the enjoyment of an outing like ours. Even a good field glass enhances the interest of a wide prospect, such as is continually met with during our lengthened driving tour, by enabling one the better to make out any special feature in the distant panorama. Being thus prepared for the road, one cloudy September morning found us driving slowly out of the vast conglomeration of smoke-stained bricks and mortar that go to make the city, or county is it, of London. Passing the Marble Arch, we reached the Edgware Road, up which we turned our horses' heads, bound first for Barnet, taking Finchley on the way, and striking the Great North Road just beyond the latter place, which famous old coaching and posting highway we propose to follow right on to Stamford Town in Lincolnshire. The morning was warm, cloudy, and rainless, though there had been a prolonged downpour during the night, but the barometer was happily on the rise. The forecast in the paper prophesied only occasional showers, and we gladly noted that there were frequent patches of blue showing through the cloud rifts above, all of which points taken together gave promise of improved meteorological conditions, so that in spite of the dullness of the moment, we drove along in the most optimist of moods, firm in the belief that the day would turn out fine. But fine or wet, we set forth on pleasure, bent with a fixed determination, come what might in the shape of weather, to enjoy ourselves, and it would have taken a good deal more than a few showers just then to damp our jubilant holiday spirits. No children fresh from school could have felt jollier than we did on that memorable morning, at perfect liberty to wander whither we would, masters of our conveyance, with no anxiety as to luggage, bound by no tiresome timetables, but departing and arriving at pleasure, stopping here and there when anything of interest attracted our attention, loitering by the way, or hastening along at our own sweet pleasure. The freedom of the road was ours, more desirable to us than the freedom of any city, however great that city might be, and the former is to be had by all, and the latter is only for the favored few. Now, kind reader, if you will permit me to call you so once more, as at last we really have started on our tour, I take the opportunity to crave your welcome company, and cordially invite you in spirit to mount onto the box seat and join us in our pleasant pilgrimage along the highways and byways of this little-traveled corner of old England, and allow me to do the honors of the country as we pass through it, and for the nonce to act the part of guide, philosopher, and friend. For the first few miles it was a getting out of town all the way. Houses and villas lined the road more or less, with tantalizing peeps between, peeps ever growing wider and more frequent, of the greenful country stretching away to the blue horizon beyond, a beyond that looked very alluring to our town-tired eyes. We drove on apace, for we found nothing to specially interest or detain us till we reached Barnet. We felt only anxious to escape as speedily as possible from the ever-spreading domain of bricks and mortar, and to reach the real open country, where pleasant footpaths take the place of the hard pavements, and fragrant hedgerows, verdurous meadows, and tilled fields with their green and golden crops, that of houses raised by the speculative builder to sell. How much better was the old system of men building their own homes to live in. The speculative builder is the unhappy product of a progressive century. He perhaps is responsible for the uglification of London more than aught else, and alas, is still adding to it. Passing through the once rural hamlet of Whetstone, it was difficult to realize that this now frequented spot was erst the favorite hunting ground of that famous, or infamous if you will, arch-highwayman, Dick Turpin. Great indeed was the terror inspired by his name, for it is recorded that many a Scotch nobleman, squire, and merchant of the period, having occasion to go from Edinburgh to London or vice versa, actually preferred to risk the dangers and suffer the certain discomforts of the then tedious sea voyage between those places, rather than face the possibility of meeting with Master Turpin, Lord of the Road, from London to York. A driving tour would have afforded plenty of excitement in those days, though I shall ever maintain that adventures, and this from personal experiences of such with Indians, bears, and rattlesnakes, whilst exploring the wild forests and mountains of far-off California, are vastly better to read about than to experience. Adventures are excellent things to relate to your friends in after-dinner talk, if you can only get them to take you seriously. Arriving at Barnet, we pulled up at the Red Lion and rested there to bait our horses. The sign of the inn, perhaps the most popular of all English signs, was not painted on a board and upheld by a post, as so frequently obtains in old-fashioned hostelries such as this, but the lion was carved in wood, and skillfully carved too, whilst to add to his dignity, we found him rejoicing in a fresh coat of vermilion, and still further, to attract the wayfarer's attention, he was supported upon a wrought iron bracket that projected right over the pavement. This sign, standing thus boldly aloft on its great bracket, was a point of interest in the everyday street for the eye to dwell upon, an interest emphasized by pastime associations, for thus, before the coming of the iron horse, had it greeted our inn-loving forefathers when journeying this way, and in a pleasantly defiant manner bade them stop and take their ease. Not that they needed much pressing to do so, for did not the worthy Dr. Johnson, when posting across country, frequently exclaim, "Here is an inn, let us rest awhile"? But that was in the leisurely days gone by, when mortals had more time to call their own. I have often wondered, could he be conjured back to life again, what the worthy doctor would think of present-time ways, what he would say of the railways, but above all, what his opinion would be of the huge Company Hotel, where he would find his individuality merged in a mere number. I trow he would prefer his comfortable tavern, where he could have his quiet talk and listeners. I find, by referring to some ancient and valued road books in my possession, that the two chief inns of the coaching age at Barnet were the Red Lion and the Green Man, each patronized by rival coaches. The latter sign, I imagine, judging from the frequent mention of it in the same authorities, to have been at the period a very common and popular one, though now apparently gone entirely out of favor. What was the origin of this strange sign I cannot say, but it may be remembered that green men, that is, men with their faces, arms, and hands stained that hue, and their bodies covered with skins, were frequently to be found amongst the processions and pageants of the sight-loving Middle Ages, such a get-up being intended to represent a savage, and constant mention of them was made in the old writings and plays. In the play of The Cobbler's Prophecy, 1594, one of the characters is made to say, "Comes there a pageant by, then I'll stand out of the green man's way." I find also in Dr. Brewer's Handbook of Allusions an extract given from a play of a year later entitled The Seven Champions of Christendom, which runs as follows. Have you any squibs or green man in your shows? During the next century and for some time afterwards, gamekeepers were usually clad in green, a fact noted by Crabbe. But the green man shall I pass by unsung, a squire's attendant clad in keeper's green. At one or other of these two once famous hostels, the old coaches took their first change out, or their last change in, and not much time was allowed for or lost in the changing either. For if our ancestors, according to modern notions, made haste slowly, at least they made all the haste they knew. The now quiet, except at the time of the noted horse fair, Barnet High Street, was then astir all the day long and half the night with the coming and going of coaches, to say nothing of posters, and the roadway rang with the rattle and clatter of fast-traveling teams. The air was resonant with the musical echoes of the frequent horn, whilst the hurried shout of next change kept the inn-yards alive and ready, the ostlers alert. Steam has changed all this. Now we travel more speedily, but less picturesquely, more luxuriously, but less romantically. Why, the very meaning of the word travel, derived, my dictionary informs me, from travail, excessive toil, has surely wholly lost its signification in this easy-going age of Pullman cars and mail steamers that are in reality floating palaces. Yet somehow I sometimes find myself sighing for a little less luxury and speed, and for more of that picturesqueness and good fellowship engendered by the conditions of old-time travel that stands out in such sharp antithesis to the ugliness and unmannerly taciturnity that has come with the railway. The ugliness is universal, but the taciturnity, for some cause I cannot fathom, is confined mostly to England. Said a prominent citizen of Chicago to me one day, upon his arrival at St. Pancras Station, where I went to meet him as my visitor, in response to my greetings, "Well, sir, as you kindly ask me, I guess I had a mighty pleasant voyage in the steamer, and found your countrymen aboard most agreeable and entertaining. But when I got on the cars at Liverpool with 4 other Britishers, we had a regular Quakers' meeting time all the way to London, and when I chanced to make a remark, they really appeared utterly astonished that a stranger should venture to address them. Now that just strikes me as peculiar, and if that's your land-traveling manners, I guess I don't much admire them. Surely there's no sin in one stranger politely speaking to another. Indeed, it seems sort of rude to me to get into a car and never as much as utter good morning or I beg your pardon as you pass a party by to take your seat. Perhaps you can tell me just how it is that your countrymen are so stand-offish on the cars." But we could not answer the question satisfactorily to the querist or to ourselves. It may be news to many. It was to me till the other day, when quite accidentally I came across the fact in an ancient road book that in the days of Charles II, Barnet was a watering place of considerable repute, even disputing supremacy with its rising rival of Tunbridge Wells. In a field near the town on the Elstree Road is the formerly famous, but now almost forgotten, Chalabiate Spring, known 2 centuries ago as the Physic Well, and much resorted to by the fashionable folk of the Restoration days. On glancing over the ever-fresh and entertaining Diary of Samuel Pepys, that chatty old-time road traveler who was always getting up betimes and starting off somewhere or another, I noted the following entry. 11 August 1667, Lord's Day. Up by 4 o'clock, and ready with Mrs. Turner. Why so often without your wife, good Mr. Pepys? To take coach before 5, and set out on our journey, and got to the Wells at Barnet by 7 o'clock. Not a great rate of speed, and there found many people a-drinking. But the morning is a very cold morning, so as we were very cold all the way in the coach. So after drinking 3 glasses, and the women nothing, wise women, we back by coach to Barnet, where to the Red Lion, wearing light, and went up into the great room, and drank and eat, and so to Hatfield, where he took coach again, and got home with great content. Amongst my prized possessions is a quaint and ancient map of London and the country for about 20 miles round. This interesting map I find, by an inscription enclosed in a roll at the foot, was printed and presumably engraved in Amsterdam, when I cannot say, for unfortunately no date is given. An antiquarian friend of mine, however, an authority on old prints, declares it to be of about the time of Charles II, though he says it might possibly be copied from an earlier production of the same kind, and made up to that approximate date. It is just probable, therefore, that Mr. Pepys may have seen and used a similar map, and on mine I find Barnet Wells duly marked at a point about a mile southwest of the town. These ancient maps, besides being very interesting, oftentimes reveal the origin of puzzling place names otherwise untraceable. For instance, I never could account for the peculiar title of the little Sussex town of Uckfield until one day I found it spelt Oakfield on an old map, and as oaks still abound in the locality, I have no doubt that Uckfield was evolved therefrom, and I could enumerate many other instances of a like nature. So, on further consulting my Amsterdam chart, I find Hatfield, which we shall reach in due course, given as Heathfield. Now from this to Hatfield is an easy transition. Next I observe that the country immediately north of Barnet is represented as wild and unenclosed, and is marked Gladmore Heath. A corner of this bears the gruesome but suggestive title, Dead Man's Bottom. It is highly probable that the famous Battle of Barnet was fought on this open waste, it being a suitable site for such a conflict, and the Dead Man's Bottom may mark the spot where a number of the slain were buried. Hertfordshire is also rendered, as now generally pronounced, Hertfordshire, so perhaps it is the spelling, not the pronunciation, that has changed. A wonderful production is this old map, for in the apparently sparsely populated country around the then moderate-sized city of London, each church tower is pictured in miniature. Even solitary houses, including numerous farmsteads, are so shown. Tiny drawings of windmills abound, and on the rivers, wheels are marked here and there, evidently intended to point out the position of sundry watermills. Bridges over the rivers are infrequent, but fords across and ferries over them are plentiful. Now and again one is reminded of other days and other ways by a dot inscribed above or below, simply but sufficiently, the gallows, a familiar but gruesome spectacle, the reality of which must often have been forced on the unwelcome sight of pastime travelers, and possibly haunted the memories and dreams of the more nervous amongst them for long afterwards. Even at one lonely place, the map condescends to place a solitary tree with the title Halfway Tree. On the little river Wandle, several watermills are shown, most of which bear merely names, but sometimes is added the kind of mill. I note on this same short stream the following kinds: iron mill, copper mill, powder mill, and one Brazil mill, whatever that may be. On the river Lee I find a paper mill, but that is the only one of the sort I can discover, though powder mills abound. The latter perhaps were called into requisition by the recent civil wars. One lonely house is marked Hanted. Could this possibly mean haunted? But I must stop my disquisition, for I could easily discourse for a whole chapter upon this curious map, were I to let my pen run away with me, as it is inclined to do. And with that charming finality to Chapter 1, I think we'll end this evening's reading of Over Fen and Wold, which I must say I found thoroughly charming and picturesque, even though we haven't actually really started our journey. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the illustrations, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.